I'm Margaret Halstead, 74 years old, and the last time my son looked at me like I mattered was at his college graduation. I remember his arm around my shoulders and the way his voice caught when he said, "Thank you, Mom." But at his wedding last weekend, he didn't even flinch when his new wife called me. The help I hadn't touched my champagne. When she told the server the staff eats in the kitchen, her eyes didn't even meet mine, just floated past like I was part of the decor. And Zach, my son, my only child, just kept talking about hedge funds like nothing had happened. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to sit quietly while someone erased you in front of a crowd. I was born in Roanoke, raised on thrift and thank you notes, the kind of house where you learned early that nothing was free and kindness mattered more than pedigree. My father worked for the rail line, my mother cleaned houses for families who didn't know her name. We didn't have much, but we had pride. Sundays were for cornbread card games and folding laundry together. I was the first in our family to go to college, and by 28, I'd built a small design firm out of a rented office behind a florist shop. Zach came along after a rough winter. His father left when he was 2. I raised him with blueprints rolled under one arm and a diaper bag over the other. While other kids played with trucks, he played with color swatches. He used to call my portfolio Mom's Magic Suitcase. When I signed my first $1 million contract, I brought him home a toy drafting table. He was 8 and told me one day he'd build things just like me. And he did. Sort of. By the time he was in business school, I'd grown Halstead interiors into something real: restaurants, hotels, even a few hospitals. We went from a name printed in the corner of proposal folders to embossed lettering on downtown towers. Zach joined the company after graduation. I thought we'd be a team. Instead, somewhere between boardrooms and branding meetings, I became Margaret Halstead founder and not his mother. The wedding should have been a celebration. I wore navy silk and polished the shoes myself. Elaine, my assistant for over 30 years, pressed my scarf and laid out the brooch Zach gave me when he was 12. But when I arrived at the ceremony, my name card read, Margaret Halstead, no title, no relation. The front rows were filled with Belle's Pilates instructor and high school friends, while I sat 2 rows back beside the photographer's wife. I let it go. I told myself not to ruin the day. But by the time Belle said what she said, and Zach didn't even blink, I knew it wasn't an oversight. I excused myself, quietly stepped behind the trellis, and made a call. No anger in my voice, just calm, like I was asking about the weather. "Victor," I said, "cancel the $30 million contract Zach plans to announce tonight." He didn't ask why. He never does. That's why I trust him. What they didn't know, not yet, was that the ground they were standing on still belonged to me. And by dessert, they'd feel the shift. The champagne toast ended without applause. Zach gave a smile that never quite landed, and Belle leaned in close, her hand resting on his arm like they'd won something. The guests murmured, looking from me to the empty spot where the announcement should have been. No one knew yet what had shifted, but they felt it. Even the string quartet had paused for just a second too long. I sat back down, my hands resting quietly on the tablecloth, and watched the ripple begin. Elaine didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She reached for her water glass, but didn't drink. We both knew the contract was canceled, and by dessert, the whispers had started. Zach had spent the week hinting at big news, a new initiative, the next phase of the Sinclair legacy. Belle's wedding planner had arranged a branded monogram across the menus and centerpieces just for the announcement. But now the air buzzed with confusion. Guests leaned toward one another with raised brows, subtle glances, half smiles that didn't meet their eyes. By morning, word had traveled. A few vendors had already called Victor with questions about delayed payments and missing confirmations. I didn't answer any calls. I stayed home in the library, the only room untouched by Belle's florists and planners. The scent of eucalyptus still clung faintly to the velvet drapes. I opened the file drawer near the window and pulled the documents Victor updated last quarter. Zach's name appeared in 3 places. I'd already removed him from the operating trust. But there was more. Influence clauses, discretionary power over projects still in development, access that no longer aligned with what I now understood. I called Victor and instructed him to revoke every clause that gave Zach decision-making rights. He didn't hesitate. Understood, he said, and before I hung up, I added effective immediately. That afternoon, the registry email arrived. Subject line, final confirmation of gift transfers and funding approval. It was sent from Belle's coordinator with a cheerful note thanking me again for my generosity. 38 line items, travel funds, custom luggage and oil portrait luxury floral subscriptions. Nearly all listed me Margaret Sinclair, mother of the groom, as the benefactor. I hadn't authorized a single one. Elaine came in, reading over my shoulder. How many have processed, I asked. She scanned the spreadsheet. 3 so far. The rest are pending. I picked up the phone again. Victor, I said, place a hold on all registry-related transactions. Tell them it's a clerical issue. He replied without hesitation. It'll be done before sunset. By the next morning, Belle's assistant had emailed Elaine asking about a few minor delays. We sent back a single line, pending review. Please, stand by. At the farewell brunch, guests gathered beneath the white pergola. The air was warm, too warm for early summer, and the white hydrangeas were starting to droop at the edges. I wore linen. No scarf, no ring, nothing borrowed. Belle floated between tables in pastel silk, smiling with just enough teeth to suggest effort. Zach stood off to the side, pretending to laugh with a hedge fund contact who looked bored. I stayed near the back wall where Elaine handed me a guest list annotated with quiet precision. The DJ called for attention. Belle motioned for Zach to speak. He looked hesitant. Before he could step forward, I did. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I simply said, just once. I thanked the guests. I spoke of family of love that endures, not love that poses for portraits. I said that legacy isn't built on logos or linen napkins. It's built on kindness, on memory, on truth spoken even when no one's watching. I raised my glass and toasted not to the couple but to truth and to those who protect it. The applause came slow, uneven. Mrs. Davenport clapped first. Elaine followed. A few others joined. Zach stood frozen still, holding his champagne. Belle's smile had faltered. She looked like someone trying to pretend a match hadn't just been struck in a dry field. I left without waiting for the toast to end. Elaine caught up to me as I stepped beyond the garden. That'll be in the society columns by dinner, she said. I handed her my clutch. Good, I told her. Let them print something true for once. That evening I found an envelope slipped under the door to my study. Heavy cardstock. Monogrammed. No signature. The note inside read, "You didn't have to humiliate us." I placed it in the fireplace, let the paper curl black at the edges, and wrote my own record of what had happened. Not for drama, for documentation. Victor would file it before the next morning. It was late when I stepped into the hallway outside the bridal suite. The corridor was quiet. Staff were clearing dishes and folding linens into plastic bins. I'd left my wrap near the parlor earlier and walked back to retrieve it. That's when I heard them. The door to the suite was cracked an inch. Belle's voice came first. "You said she'd be predictable," she snapped. "You said she'd smile, give a speech, and roll over like she always does." Zach replied lower. "Well, she didn't. And now, half the guest list thinks we can't afford our own honeymoon." A pause. Then Belle again. "How long do we have to keep pretending to tolerate her?" I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Zach sighed. "She's almost 75. All we need is one confused statement, one missed pill. Something a judge can look at." Belle's voice dropped quiet and sharp. "She's not going to hand us anything. You're going to have to take it." "She trusts me," he said. She always has. Well, Belle replied, not anymore. They clinked glasses. I turned and walked back to my study. Retrieved the small voice recorder Elaine had packed in my bag earlier, just in case. I sat down at the desk and began to speak. Time, date, names, words. Elaine signed it as a witness before it went into the safe. Victor would have it within the hour. That night, I poured myself a glass of red from a bottle Zach once gave me for his law school graduation. He said it was too bitter back then. I drank it slowly, sitting beneath the portrait of him in his Little League uniform. He was smiling in the photo, really smiling. I watched the fire die down and listened to the quiet between the rooms. I didn't sleep, but I didn't cry either. I was no longer trying to be seen. I was preparing not to be erased. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I'd already changed the bank structure. A new account, new access protocols. The codes were written out in duplicate, one copy for Victor, one sealed in the safe with the trust documents. Elaine picked up fresh pastries on her way in and didn't ask why I looked like I hadn't slept. She just handed me the ledger and said, "Everything's been updated." We went through the new inventory line by line. Jewelry archives, property holdings. Each heirloom was reboxed, relabeled, and placed in the controlled vault, no longer on loan, no longer accessible by anyone but me and Elaine. Not even Zach. Especially not Zach. By mid-morning, Elaine had prepared a full access report and distributed it to our legal and archival teams with a simple note, effective immediately, controlled by founder only. That afternoon, the phone rang twice. Both calls from numbers I recognized. I let them go to voicemail. The quiet wasn't peace. Not yet. It was calculation. In that space between noise and action, I spent time walking the halls. I paused in front of every photograph that still hung in the gallery. Some I'd chosen myself. Others were placed by decorators Belle had hired. Engagement shots, gala nights, studio portraits that had been retouched to the point of fiction. I ran my fingers across the frame with Zach in his Little League uniform, the one with the dirt stain still visible on the collar. I'd kept it untouched. I wanted the truth of it. It rained the next morning. A soft, steady rain that blurred the windows and kept the landscapers away. I took my tea in the sitting room, the one James used to call the good room where guests were brought and secrets stayed out. Elaine joined me with a manila folder. Inside were copies of the canceled registry transactions and a draft of our new disbursement policy. I signed each page. She initialed the corners. Victor would have the originals by courier before lunch. By late afternoon, the questions had begun to circulate in earnest. One of Belle's former colleagues, someone from a startup she tried to launch before the wedding, called Elaine to touch base about a possible collaboration. They'd heard something about a change in control. They wanted to be sure where things stood. That same evening, Zach left a message. His tone was casual, but the rhythm was off. "Hey, Mom. I think there's been a little confusion around the registry. Belle said something might have gotten delayed on the back end. Can we talk?" We didn't. I sat in my office with the shades drawn and read through archived board memos. Memos where my signature was printed beside his always last, always final. That won't happen again. The next morning, I hosted a private meeting at the estate, not in the boardroom, not in the library, but in the sunroom. A circle of 6 women, friends, colleagues, the kind of women who didn't need to be told what was happening to understand what had shifted. I served lemon water and carrot tea bread, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself speak plainly. "I'm stepping back from the main board," I said. "I've decided to direct my resources elsewhere, initiatives that don't require family management." No one gasped. No one asked why. They just nodded as if the decision had already arrived in their minds long before I said it aloud. Before they left, one slipped me a business card folded in half. "Women's Foundation of DC," she said. "They'd love to meet you." Elaine stayed behind to clear the plates. She looked down at the place card left behind on the table, the one with my name printed in gold script. "They're already talking," she said. "Good," I replied. "Let them." 2 days later, Mrs. Davenport stopped by. She didn't bring a bottle of wine or her usual tiramisu, just a single envelope and a raised eyebrow. "I heard," she said. "You're cleaning house." I smiled, but said nothing. She took her seat across from me in the study and crossed her legs slowly. "You know, when my sister passed, her daughter tried the same thing. Restructure, influence, inheritance, all very civil on the outside, but once you've watched long enough, you know the signs." She slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a handwritten note from a donor who had pulled out of Zach's upcoming gala. "They said they prefer to align with founders, now," Mrs. Davenport said. "Legacy loyalty, you understand." She stood and adjusted her coat. "You've done it the right way, Maggie. Not all of us remember how to do quiet well." I walked her out, and for a moment the porch felt less like a threshold and more like a shield. That evening, Victor called. He was reviewing the asset summaries and noticed a pattern. Belle's proposed foundation, the one she had floated during the engagement, was no longer listed as a match-eligible organization through any of our networks. That eligibility had expired without renewal. "Should I alert them?" he asked. "No," I said. "Let the silence say it." At the next quarterly board meeting, the first I didn't attend in 12 years, Zach raised a concern. "I'm hearing mixed messages about Sinclair Design's future," he said. "Some of our donors are uncertain about leadership direction." Victor sat 2 chairs away and didn't flinch. "That's the cost of standing in someone else's shadow," he said. "You never know what shape your own makes." There were no more questions. I poured myself a glass of wine that night. Not to celebrate, just to mark the moment. Revenge wasn't the point. It never was. The scaffolding was beginning to shift, and by the time it collapsed, I wouldn't be standing underneath it. It was just past 8 when I stepped out onto the balcony with my tea. The morning air was cool, and the trees along the edge of the property were still. Elaine was already inside sorting the latest stack of correspondence vendor inquiries, gala invitations, a few handwritten cards from women I'd known since Zach was in grade school. I let the screen door close softly behind me and stood for a moment watching the fog rise off the garden path. Victor called an hour later. I was still in my robe. He'd been reviewing a handful of internal estate records when something caught his attention. "She's shopping guardianship attorneys," he said, "the kind that specialize in elder trust disputes." I didn't answer right away. He continued. "It's early, but from what I've seen, she's laying the groundwork. She's telling people you've grown unpredictable." I asked him to send over everything he had. Names, firms, timestamps. Then I set the phone down and walked back to the library. Elaine met me there a few minutes later. I asked her to begin a full archive audit, every conversation, every signed document, every recorded statement involving Zach or Belle over the last year. Phone logs, emails, financial transfers, property authorizations. Nothing verbal unless it was backed by witness or timestamp. And moving forward, no private meetings. Not with either of them. Not even a lunch unless logged and accompanied. She nodded without hesitation. "We'll start today." We had the first report in hand by afternoon. At dinner, I picked at my salmon and reread Zach's board remarks from the previous quarter. His tone had shifted less assertive, more reactive. There were notes in the margins from one of the junior partners. Unclear on strategy they'd scribbled, waiting on confirmation from Maggie. That confirmation wasn't coming anymore. That night, I walked the upstairs hallway and paused in front of the portrait above the staircase. Zach at 9, his glove tucked under one arm, his front teeth missing. I traced the edge of the frame with one hand. Then I turned back toward my office. I pulled the recorder from my desk drawer. The same one I'd used at the wedding. The same one I kept now as a habit. I pressed the button and began to speak softly, clearly. I gave the date, the summary, the names. Then I logged the entire phone call with Victor and signed the transcript. Elaine arrived the next morning with a sealed copy already notarized. She placed it on my desk and asked, "What next?" I told her I wanted to schedule a small luncheon. Just 6 women, no more. No press, no photographers, no public agenda. She gave a small nod. Wednesday at noon. The invitations went out that afternoon. No assistants. Hand-delivered. The women who arrived 3 days later were not strangers. Some had chaired museum boards with me. Others had served on hospital committees. One had been with me when I signed my first hotel contract. We sat in the solarium with soft jazz playing through the overhead speakers and lemon slices floating in glass pitchers. I told them the truth. Not all of it, but enough. I said I was restructuring, that the estate would no longer be directed through Sinclair Holdings, that I was moving forward with a private initiative, one focused on design education and housing grants for women in transition. They didn't ask questions. They passed the butter. They nodded. By the time dessert was cleared, 2 had asked to be introduced to Victor. One slipped a card across the table for a philanthropic board based in Seattle. Another simply reached across and touched my hand. "It's good," she said, "that you're doing this now." When they left, Elaine returned with the guest list. She had already marked who lingered, who stayed silent, who asked nothing. That evening, I sat at the window and listened to the sound of the rain returning, a steady, quiet rhythm against the glass. Zach called the next morning, twice. I didn't answer. The messages were longer now, more uncertain. He said he was hearing things that people were asking questions he couldn't answer. Elaine walked in as the phone rang a 3rd time. "He started calling board members directly," she said. "One asked if you'd like to issue a public statement." I shook my head. "I've already said what matters." That Friday, Victor sent over the final draft of the new trust structure. Zach's name was no longer listed under strategic access or advisory capacity. He would still receive a small living allowance. No one would starve, but nothing beyond that. I signed the last page and watched the ink dry in the corner. Later that day, Victor hesitated before ending our call. "There's one more thing," he said. "It's not confirmed yet, but there are murmurs." I waited. "She may be pursuing a claim of medical concern, psychological inconsistency, possibly to challenge your capacity." I didn't respond. I didn't ask for details. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and removed the secondary estate binder. Inside was a handwritten log of every decision made in the last 18 months. Signatures, notarizations, witness confirmations, voice transcripts. I handed it to Elaine that night. "Have a digital backup made," I said. "Password protected. 3 layers. One to Victor, one to the foundation." She nodded. "Understood." I sat back and looked at the ceiling. The rain had stopped. The clouds were clearing. The moon was visible through the skylight. They weren't waiting for me to step aside anymore. They were preparing to take it. The morning the final trust changes were filed, I wore navy. Not black. Navy held power without the weight of mourning. Victor met me at his office, opened the conference room door himself, and nodded once when I stepped inside. We didn't linger. The folder was already waiting on the table, crisp edges, brass clip. He slid it toward me, his pen uncapped. "I've drafted 3 versions," he said. But I think you'll want this one. I opened the top page. The bulk of the estate once designated for Zach and his heirs was now reallocated. Scholarships, transitional housing, grants for women in design education, and a discretionary fund under my name for the Sinclair Initiative independent of the company. Zach would still receive a small living trust. Nothing more. I want Elaine's name included, I said. No titles, just listed. Victor added it without question. Then he closed the file, tapped once on the corner, and said, "This one will hold." I signed. We didn't shake hands. We didn't toast. He knew what it meant. By the time I got home, the clouds had rolled in low over the hill behind the estate. Elaine met me at the entryway with a soft envelope in hand. "Arrived just after you left," she said. It was a card. No return address. Just my name in Zach's handwriting. I opened it at the kitchen counter. 5 lines, 1 request. He wanted to meet. No attorneys. No bell. Just us. He said he had something he needed to say. I placed the card beside the stove and let it sit there the rest of the afternoon. The next morning, I made a call of my own. "Victor, I said I want to begin divesting." He didn't ask which assets. I told him to start with the holdings Zach never understood, licensing rights, quiet real estate stakes, dormant patents buried under shell corporations. The ghost portfolio, Victor called it. Nothing flashy, nothing public, but stable, profitable, all controlled by me. That week we pulled out of a textile partnership Belle had been counting on. The boutique hotel group Zach loved to name-drop at board meetings was quietly sold. The rights to the Sinclair Legacy Collection, once branded as Belle's future pet project, were transferred to a nonprofit I'd founded under a separate name. By Friday, a third of Zach's credibility had slipped from under him without a sound. Elaine joined me in the garden late that afternoon. The air was warm for March. A breeze moved through the camellias blooming too early again. "He's called 3 times, she said. "Left 1 voicemail." I nodded. "Let it ring." That night, Sinclair Design issued a formal statement about internal restructuring. It didn't make headlines, but it reached the people who needed to see it. The following week, Zach's name disappeared from the spring fundraiser materials. An event he'd been slated to chair was quietly canceled. The foundation board sent a thank you gift to my office, a watercolor print of the original Sinclair studio. It came with a handwritten note. "Thank you for leading with clarity." I placed it in the study and moved the older photos to storage. Elaine didn't ask why. She just offered to have the frames cleaned and boxed. The next morning, a letter arrived by courier. It was from Zach, handwritten, 2 pages. He said he didn't understand what I was doing, that he and Belle had worked so hard to build on what I'd created, that they were trying, that he didn't know why I was cutting them out. Elaine found me rereading the last paragraph. "You all right?" she asked. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and said, "I just keep thinking I gave him everything, and he thought it came without weight." She set a cup of tea beside me and waited. I made 1 more call that afternoon. "Victor," I said, "let's donate the licensing proceeds to transitional housing grants. Use the Sinclair name." He paused, then said, "That'll make waves." "Good," I replied. That night, I slept without waking. No calls, no questions, no movement in the hallway. Just stillness. 3 days later, a new envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a photograph. Zach and I at his law school graduation, his arm draped across my shoulders. I was wearing the navy suit James once called my armor. Taped to the back was a short note written in my own handwriting years ago. "The last time you looked at me with respect." Elaine walked in as I was holding it. "Want me to deliver it in person?" she asked. I shook my head. "Send it to his office." 2 days later, Zach showed up at the estate. alone. No bell, no driver. He waited on the back porch until I joined him. We sat beneath the fig tree in silence. The same one where I used to read him storybooks during summers when the studio was slow. "I got your note," he said. "And I deserved it." I didn't respond. He looked down. "You think I don't know I messed up? That I let Belle speak to you like that? That I didn't stop it? I hate that version of me." He paused, waited. "I just wanted to build something. To be someone." "You were someone," I said quietly. "Long before the board seats. I know that now. That's the problem," I told him. "You know it now." He looked up. "I miss you," he said. I turned toward the garden. The camellias had started to brown at the edges. Missing someone doesn't bring them back. He nodded once. "I didn't come to ask for anything. Not the house. Not the trust. I just didn't want to be a ghost." We sat a while longer. The breeze moved through the branches. Birds moved in the distance. "You know what hurt the most?" I asked. "It wasn't the money. It wasn't the titles. It was watching you stand beside someone while she erased me, and you didn't blink." He swallowed hard. "I didn't think it mattered, and there it was. The wound that didn't bleed. The silence that cut." "I thought you'd keep being strong," he said. I stood then slowly, not angry, just done. "I am strong," I said. "That's why I'm not angry anymore." He stood too. "I'm sorry," he said. "I believe that," I replied. "But sorry isn't a door. It's a mirror." He didn't respond. He left through the side gate, and I stayed beneath the fig tree. The sun shifted. The house behind me didn't move, but I had. I didn't call him after that. He didn't call again either. The fig tree dropped its last bloom the day after he left. Elaine came by to prune the lowest branches, and I watched her through the window while sipping tea that had long since gone cold. There was a stillness in the air. Not peace exactly, not yet, but something that felt like it might turn into it eventually. That Friday, we packed up my office. 42 years of ledgers, sketches, contracts, and prototypes boxed into neat rows marked Legacy and Private. Elaine handled most of it. I just stood near the shelves, placing a few final pieces in my bag. My grandmother's fountain pen. A bronze drafting compass Zach once gave me before his first semester at Wharton. The brass nameplate from my door was the last to go. Margaret Halstead, founder. I left it on the empty desk. We didn't make an announcement. Not that day. Not yet. We just walked out, passed through the front atrium, and stepped into the waiting car. No one stopped us. Most didn't even notice. The next morning, I moved into the lake cottage, a small space I'd kept for years tucked into a quiet bend where the shoreline curved just enough to keep the wind gentle. There was a stone fireplace, shelves full of books, and a narrow porch with just enough room for 2 rocking chairs. Elaine came by to help arrange the reading nook. She placed the last crate near the window and asked if I wanted to begin drafting the press release. I nodded. "We'll send it next week." It dropped the following Tuesday, crisp, direct, and signed with my full name. After 4 decades building a family business, I have chosen to divest completely from Sinclair Holdings. I no longer hold financial, legal, or advisory ties to the company. This decision was not made in haste, but in clarity. The $30 million previously allocated to expansion will now support the Sinclair Initiative, an independent foundation focused on education and entrepreneurship for women of color. There was no mention of Zach. No mention of Belle. The phone rang within the hour. Elaine screened the calls. She flagged only one, for me a message from Mrs. Davenport. She arrived the next afternoon wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a tin of lemon bars older than some family feuds. "You dropped the match," she said, settling into the porch chair beside mine. "Didn't flinch once." I didn't answer. Just poured her tea. She sipped it without sugar, always preferring bitter. "He called me," she added after a pause. "Said he was stepping back. Said Belle left." I looked out at the lake. The water was flat as glass. "Filed for separation," she continued. Her attorneys using phrases like emotional misrepresentation and inheritance fraud. Another sip. "Empty pockets make for honest lawyers," I said quietly. She gave a raspy laugh. "You always did have the sharpest spoon in the drawer." She didn't stay long, just long enough to make sure I was all right. As she left, she leaned in at the doorway. "Did you ever love him less for all of it?" I shook my head. "No, I just stopped protecting the illusion." That evening, Elaine joined me for a walk along the shoreline. The breeze had picked up slightly, carrying the scent of pine and the faintest trace of wood smoke from a neighbor's fire. She carried a notebook in one hand. "We need to decide on the cornerstone inscription," she said, "for the foundation building." I stopped for a moment and looked toward the trees. "Tell the truth," I said, "even if it costs you everything." She wrote it down without a word. We walked on in silence. That night, I didn't dream about the estate, not about the boardroom or the design studio or the house that forgot how to hold love. I dreamed of my own hands, steady and sure, stitching something new from everything I had reclaimed. And when I woke up the next morning, I was still smiling. The first envelope came in a plain manila sleeve slipped under the screen door just after sunrise. No return address, no stamp. Just my name, printed in sharp, slanted ink. Inside was a single page, an invitation to the Sinclair Initiative's opening ceremony. It had been formatted like a formal gala notice, but there was no RSVP, no contact line. Just a line at the bottom. "You're already on the list." I left it on the kitchen counter beside the bowl of pears. Elaine arrived an hour later, carrying a box of programs and a clipboard. She'd been working with the board to finalize the speaker list and donor seating chart. I didn't ask who was attending. I already knew Zach would be there. The ceremony was scheduled for the following Saturday, held at the newly renovated Community Arts Center downtown, the same building I'd helped save from demolition 20 years ago. The foundation had leased it long-term and repurposed it into a space for workshops, mentorship programs, and rotating exhibitions by women-led design teams. The walls were still damp from fresh paint. The scent of lumber and polish clung to the baseboards. I arrived early, stepping in through the staff entrance. The main atrium had been transformed into a gallery of past and future scaled-down blueprints from my firm's earliest days displayed beside concept renderings from scholarship recipients. My grandmother's sewing machine stood at the far end, lit by a small brass lamp. A placard read, "Every legacy begins at the margins." Elaine walked beside me in silence, her heels clicking softly across the tiles. We paused at the edge of the main room where the guests were beginning to gather. "Do you want to speak before or after the chairwoman?" she asked. "After," I said. The room filled quickly. Familiar faces from years ago mingled beside new ones. Civic leaders, educators, architects, and alumni from our pilot programs. I kept mostly to the edges, watching from a distance. When the time came, Elaine gave me a small nod. I stepped onto the low stage without fanfare. No music, no introduction. I spoke plainly. Told them about the beginning, about my mother's hands, and the first time I traced a floor plan on the back of a grocery list. I didn't mention Zach. Didn't mention the boardroom or the contracts that unraveled. I talked about vision and the quiet work of restoration. How dignity doesn't announce itself, but makes itself known in how we build what we leave behind for others to grow from. They stood when I finished. I didn't linger. I left through the side exit, and walked 2 blocks back to the car. The sun had dipped low behind the city skyline. On the passenger seat was a small envelope. White this time. I opened it without thinking. Inside was a note. 3 lines, handwritten. Mom, I came. I stayed in the back. I'm not sure how to fix it, but I see it now. Zach. I folded it once and slipped it into the glove box. The radio played something soft and slow. I drove home with the windows down. 2 days later, the local paper ran a piece on the foundation launch. Below the fold was a photo of the atrium the gallery lit from above. They'd captured the sewing machine, the lamp, the banner above the main exhibit. The headline read, Halstead returns with vision for the future. That afternoon, Elaine brought over a tin of shortbread and 3 sets of thank you cards to sign. We sat on the porch as the wind shifted across the lake. The pears on the counter had begun to soften. I made a note to bake them into a tart that weekend. As we sorted through the envelopes, Elaine paused and looked up. Do you think he'll come by? I glanced out at the long road winding toward the main highway. I don't know, I said, but the porch light still works. And we kept writing. The pear tart went into the oven just after noon. Elaine had already left with the last stack of thank you cards, and the porch was quiet except for the wind moving through the maple trees out front. I folded the dish towel over the back of a kitchen chair and opened the window above the sink. Somewhere down the hill, a dog barked, then stopped. The timer on the oven read 39 minutes. I walked into the living room and turned the lamp on beside the sewing machine. The exhibit placard still sat propped beneath it, the same one from the launch. Every legacy begins at the margins. I hadn't had the heart to pack it away. It felt right here in the house where it all began. A knock at the door came just after 3. Not loud, just enough to stir the air. I opened it slowly. Zach stood there holding a white paper bag from the bakery down on Main. His eyes met mine, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. He looked older than the last time we'd stood this close. He wore the same kind of shirt his father used to wear, pressed pale blue sleeves rolled up. I brought almond croissants, he said. I stepped back and let the screen door swing open behind me. He didn't say much at first. We sat on the porch, 2 mugs of coffee between us, the tart cooling on a wire rack inside. He looked out toward the trees, then down at his hands. I could tell he wasn't sure where to begin. So I waited. Eventually, he asked about the exhibit, about the women I'd mentored, about the photographs in the gallery and the students whose sketches lined the walls. I told him what I could not too much, just enough to open the door. He nodded slowly. I should have come sooner, he said. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked if he wanted a slice of tart. He did. We moved inside, sat at the kitchen table. The same table where he used to do homework in the 6th grade, where he once knocked over a glass of milk trying to reach the butter dish. He smiled when I reminded him. Just faintly. But it was real. Before he left that afternoon, he stood by the sewing machine and touched the edge of the wood. This was Grandma's, he asked. It was, I said. He looked at the placard, then at me. I think Dad would have been proud, he said, quietly. I watched him walk back to his car, the paper bag empty now, tucked under one arm. He didn't promise to come back, but he didn't need to. That night, I sat by the window as the porch light flickered on. The trees outside moved gently in the dark. I thought about the years lost the silence that had grown between us like a second skin. And I thought about how healing doesn't always arrive with grand gestures or perfect apologies. Sometimes it's a knock on the door, a shared tart, a second chance. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: kindness doesn't guarantee justice, but it makes room for it. And dignity isn't what you're given. It's what you keep even when no one's watching. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story reminded you of anything or anyone in your life, feel free to share it in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more quiet stories of strength and healing, I'd be glad to have you back.